Welcome everybody to the Nightly News Podcast. This is Professor Paul Miller, and we have a full house down here at the Nasir Harris Podcast Studio at the Boyer House at Central Penn College. We are being joined by Janet Bixler, Maria Thiaw, and Sharia Benn, and we'll give everybody an appropriate introduction here momentarily. We're talking about the upcoming Bridge the Gap that is going to be presented on September 14th and 15th at the Capital BlueCross Theatre here at the campus of Central Penn College. So as a quick introduction, podcast veterans certainly know Janet. Janet, you come down every single term. You are in charge of the Capital BlueCross Theatre, and we certainly appreciate you coming down each term to promote what you have going on. Maria Thiaw, you've actually been on the podcast twice, and we're looking forward to you being a part of our Best Of show that's coming up next week. We're going to take a look back at some of our previous podcasts, and Maria has certainly is going to be a part of that. Sharia Benn. Sharia is the Executive Artistic Director of Sankofa African American Theater Company, but not just that, has been involved in a series of other, not only just things here on Central Penn College campus, but certainly out in the community in the theater world, in addition to having a full-time job. I mean, do you ever have time to sleep?
No.
So we're going to have a chance to talk with this group about the creative process behind Bridge the Gap. But Janet, I want to start with you because typically when we have you down, I do like to chat about some of the previous efforts from the Capital BlueCross Theatre. I want to rewind back to Lost and Found that happened in the spring term, and I wanted to get some insight from you about how that ended up in the long run and your impressions from the show as you look back.
Well, that was our 5th student-created play, using elements of devised theater to create it, and it was by far our best student-created play. And the students who were in the 4th and the 5th, Parker, Rose, and Bree McCoy, they were in the 4th and the 5th, they loved the 4th, and they're like, nothing will be better than the 4th. And then they did the 5th. And I was so impressed. It was unique. We had 5 actors. Only 3 of the actors shared personal true stories on the theme Lost and Found. And the beautiful aspect of that was the 3 women who shared their stories. One was in her 20s, one was in her 40s, and one was in her 50s. And they had long personal stories that related to Lost and Found. And they all decided from the beginning, before we even went on break, before we went into the rehearsal process, that they wanted this student-created play to have a lot of color, a lot of life, and a lot of humor. So when they got back, they decided to stage it as Twisted Fairy Tales. And then Parker returned from his 2 weeks with the military. What is that word?
He's with the National Guard.
Yes. And when he returned, I said, Parker, we need you for some comedic relief. And he said, okay. And he didn't realize he was going to be playing 10 different characters.
That's incredible.
Nonstop through the entire show. And it was amazing. And then Nada Shalah, she came on board after the Women's Leadership Retreat, which was focused on self-love and self-care. We got to talking, and I said, please come attend one of our rehearsals just to share some thoughts. She came in, and we're looking at Lost and Found. We're looking at these women's true stories that started, for some of them, when they were 7 years old, of having lost and trying to figure out what they have found as a result. As she heard the stories unravel, she started to make all these connections to self-care and self-love. And she was saying really beautiful and poetic things. And I said, Nada, will you please be in our show? And she said, yes. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And she created this character called Journeywoman. And without her, we really would not have had a play. And the one reason it was the best play so far, it was the most woven together. Most of our student-created plays, because of our time limit and because of our limited experience as actors, are very episodic. One story kind of stands alone, and then another story can come up. But here, the stories would weave together in and out. They kept wanting to have the audience on the edge of their seat, a cliffhanger. So we would hear a little bit about Tabitha's story. Then we would hear a little bit about Marnie's story. And then we'd hear a little bit about Bree's story. But all these characters were weaving together. And then, of course, with Parker's comedic relief with all his like weird and evil characters. And then the journeywoman, Nada, coming in and encouraging them to go forth in their discoveries, but making it very hard for them. It was a wonderful experience. And we had really great audiences, and they also agreed. It was really powerful because we actually did a burning ceremony of one of the props relating to Marnie's story that she had to release. And then we went over to the Susquehanna Art Museum to attend an art exhibit with their education director around themes of lost and found, looking at prints from Picasso.
That's awesome. You know, one thing I did have the chance to talk to Parker a little bit about this. One thing that he pointed out was how difficult it was because of the subject matter of some of these stories, if not all of the stories, right? How did you deal with that as the director of the show? How did you deal with some of the maybe personal, for lack of a better term, you know, emotional roller coaster ride that some of the actors may have been on while talking about their own personal stories?
We are really lucky to have Tom Palmieri as our director of counseling services, and he and his interns attended every rehearsal for at least the first 2 weeks, and then they would come in as we requested. And this was new to my process of doing devised theater. For the first 2 weeks, they were at a table telling their story again and again and again to unearth the elements we needed to create the play, but also so that they could work through the trauma of their stories, because it was traumatic. And then after the fact of the performance, the actors came back and not only said how glad they were that they told their stories to Tom and the other counselors in session with us, but that they performed it for an audience so that strangers could see it, and maybe the actor stories could help an audience member who had a similar story, and that happened. Several female students came up to Marnie in relationship to her story, and to talk about the very traumatic issue, and others came up to Tabitha. And then Tabitha and Marnie both said how glad they were as actors in the show, because while it did kind of work like therapy for them, they were actually able to move forward in their life, to make other decisions, to let things go.
That's awesome.
And it was amazing, because you hope that happens, but you can't guarantee it.
Well, and I'm so glad that went well. I was able to attend, and honestly, from someone in the audience's perspective, it was a roller coaster ride, because you understood that these people had gone through these things, and you know, when you're watching something on screen, you're usually thinking, okay, these people are just actors and they're just acting. This was acting, yes, but this was their real life circumstances, and that's what to me was so powerful. But it also, at the same time, there were elements of it being lighthearted as well, which I thought was very unique. Well, I really want to talk about why you're here, and that is about Bridge the Gap, again, coming up on September 14th and 15th. So I wanted you to kind of start off by kind of giving an introduction to the project and maybe some of your background that you have with Sharia.
Yes. Well, the history of the Capital BlueCross Theatre, now in its 5th season, about to celebrate its 5th anniversary in October.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We have a history of working and collaborating with other theater practitioners. So, very excited when a friend, a theater colleague of mine from outside of our world here at Central Penn College, came to me and said, let's do a piece of theater together. So Sharia, Benn, and I, we first met, we think, around 2006, when we were both working for Pennsylvania Past Players, which was an organization that worked with Pennsylvania tourism. And we portrayed real live dead people who lived in the area of Harrisburg during the Civil War. So I portrayed Mary S. Leader from Hanover, Pennsylvania, and Sharia, when we worked together, portrayed Mrs. Stephen Smith from Columbia. And she was the wife of the man who was a very wealthy banker and developer in Columbia. Well, we got to know each other that way. And then Sharia got involved in creating Sankofa African American Theater Company and creating a one-woman show about another phenomenal woman from the Civil War period, Frances Ellen Walker Harper. Watkins Harper. Thank you, Sharia. Which is a phenomenal one-woman show. Then Sharia came over to our theater 2 years ago in 2018 when Maria Chow and I created Reclaiming My Time, an American Griot project. Maria, for 5 years, had gone out to interview women who lived during the civil rights and Jim Crow era. She took their stories, turned it into her form of poetry, and she and I then staged those poems in the round with an ensemble of female actors. And Sharia attended the show, and Sharia said, I want to work with you all and create a piece of theater. And then Sharia brought to us a photograph. And so that's how Bridge the Gap started. And now I'm going to be quiet for most of the rest of our chat and let Sharia and Maria share.
Well, Sharia, let's talk a little bit about your background with this show. So we got up to about this point, but let's step back a little bit. You've obviously been a major part of local theater companies, not only with Sankofa African American Theater Company. You've also been as part of Open Stage Harrisburg, as part of the Gamut Theater over the years, and certainly have had. That's just a tip of the iceberg. What was it about this particular show and this particular opportunity that may be a little bit different than some of the things you've done previously?
This Bridge the Gap, it's different because it really is about the process as much as it is about the production itself. And that is different than all of the things that I have done previously in theater. And this really focuses on healing and bridging the gaps that we have as a community, racially, socially, culturally. There's so many things that divide us. So this project and this work was specifically designed to address those, not to answer all of the issues, not to solve all of the problems, but to bring people together around those themes. Also, as part of Sankofa's mission and vision, it is to bridge the talent gap that exists in this community, especially when it relates to African American actors, African American focused theater pieces, and African Americans attending and being part of the audience and a part of the narrative. So this project brings all of that together, and I'm excited about project of finding and building and developing talent and bringing together experienced artists and new artists, and also about the production itself. But mostly, I'm really excited about the collaborative effort between Sankofa, Reclaim, the Artist Collective, and also the Capital BlueCross Theatre at Central Penn around this theme about bridging gaps. Thus, the production, Bridge the Gap.
I love it. Maria, I want to bring you in here. We've actually, on the 2 times that you've been on, this has actually sort of been the subject of both of our conversations. So we've kind of been with you through this process, whether it was, first kind of finishing the original American Griot project to Reclaiming My Time. Mm-hmm. How is this going to differ, or maybe just for somebody who might be familiar with Reclaiming My Time, how's this particular effort going to differ from Reclaiming My Time, because you're still along the same subject lines?
Reclaiming My Time was a choreo poem, so the whole story was told through the poetry, and it all tied together, but it was separate stories brought together to become one story, and all told through poetry. Whereas Bridge the Gap also has more dialogue and conversation, more scripting, where almost, if you think like a musical, where there is some dialogue, some storytelling going on, and then a song. And here it's not show tunes, it's poetry, for lack of a better explanation.
I think that's a fantastic analogy, because when trying to see, because Reclaiming My Time was so unique, but to your point, there wasn't while there were themes, there wasn't necessarily a cohesive storyline, but I think that's how you wanted it. That's how you intended it to be. Yes. In this case, you're saying that this is going to be a little bit more like a story that develops into the traditional act sequence that one might expect from theater?
Yes. You'll see family secrets, you'll see love, you'll see all conflict, all of those things that people expect to see in really good theater.
Well, I want to ask, obviously, like I said, you've kind of moved along from the griot project. I know that you still kind of have your hands in some of that, but how did you go about taking the poetry that you'd written and developing it into this script for this particular play?
Well, Sharia gave me her themes and ideas, including that photograph that was mentioned earlier, and I went off. I had a deadline. I had the themes and just did my thing. And I produced 18 poems. Then we came back together and we talked about how they fit, where they fit. And Sharia is doing more of the developing of the script around that.
That's amazing how this process works. For someone who's not really from a theater background, the behind the scenes is what really interests me. Obviously, I know when you guys get up on stage, you do your thing, and you're super, super talented at that. But really, to me, it's the behind the scenes process that I'm so interested in. So tell me a little bit, Sharia, how did you take this, for lack of a better term, cache of poems, and then start to develop that story? I really am very interested in this. I'd love to hear more.
So I had a framework of the story in my head. When I saw the picture, the elements of a story started to come together. And I met with Maria and said, here's an outline. Here's some things that are important in this story. And here's the picture. So take this and do your thing. And it will say this is about a connection. So from the beginning, I trusted Maria with the photo, with me, and she went off. And when she bought them back, it was, I don't have words to describe it, except it was literally like a spiritual experience connecting, because her poems literally just slotted in with the storyline that I had already developed. So I knew these characters. They had names. They had a backstory. They had depth. They were developed, and the dialogue was already forming. So it was just about taking what Maria had written and piecing those in, and then weaving them together in the story. Some things were a challenge, but they needed to be there. So Maria had poems about illness. And I thought, wow, this is such a great piece. It needs to be used. And then I thought, well, wait a minute. This character's backstory has components of illness in it. So, wow, let's bring that in. And it was just surreal sometimes, but it was beautiful. And Maria's poetry is beautiful. The rhythm of the poetry, the words, and being able to connect as African Americans and women, and also having similar experiences living in the same geographical area. Mm-hmm. All of those things wove together, and this story has a definite beginning. It has a definite middle, and there's some driving forces in it. And, well, you'll just have to come and see what the end is going to be.
Let me ask you as an aside, you continue talking about this photo. Would you mind elaborating a little bit on what the photo is, so we might be able to get a better sense of some of the background here, or is that kind of a secret?
You have to experience the journey to really understand the photo. It was the inspiration. It is about a historical event and a real happening. There are elements of this photo that are so beautiful, and then there are elements that lay beneath the surface.
Picture's worth 1,000 words, right?
Yeah.
And even more. And so you that's part of it, the journey to really understand the fullness of the photo. So you have to come out and see it.
So the photo will be a key part of the show, so you don't want to give too
Yes.
much away. Okay, that's what I wanted to know. So, Marie, I want to talk to you about just as some of the background. So, for a very long period of time, I don't want to just say 5 years because you've been working on this as long as I've known you. The American Griot Project was your sort of venture into speaking with some people who had been involved with the civil rights movement of all different ages and of all different backgrounds. And the last time, what's so funny about this, Maria, is that just sort of a preview for next week, is I actually just listened to that episode because I'm cutting together pieces of that particular episode. And the one thing that you'd mentioned, and this was probably 2 years ago when we had this conversation, was that a lot of the people that you were trying to interview were either becoming sick or they were having memory problems. Did you find that was one of your biggest problems when you were originally going through this, is just there's only a finite amount of time that we're here? That
had to get me moving, because it was just like, it's very easy, especially on the hamster wheel that we run on here as faculty at Central Penn. It's very easy to have an idea and let it sit for too long. And once we lost Ava Hip Soul, who was an activist and a poet in Harrisburg, and that was sudden. And then we lost Ann Lyon, another activist, an amazing woman, and she was a professor at Hack. And also her memory started going a little bit before we lost her. It's like, hey, you better wake up and get this thing done. My dear friend Rachel Jones-Williams as well, who taught for us for a little while, was going to help me out. She's a historian, and she passed away. And it was like, okay, am I jinxed, or should I just get moving on this thing? And so thank God for those amazing women who all encouraged me and inspired me. And so I did get moving, and I was able to interview women between the ages of 60 and 95 years old.
It's incredible. Mm-hmm. I love it. So you've created a nonprofit organization called the Reclaim Artist Collective. So I'm assuming that this is one of the first ventures of that. Well, what do you see long-term of the Reclaim Artist Collective in your future, if you had a crystal ball in front of you?
There's so many ideas, right? There's so many ideas. But we want to create programs that can offer regular people the opportunities to raise their consciousness, raise their confidence, help them as artists, bring them healing, especially for those individuals in marginalized communities. So to take programs into struggling school districts, where that might be losing arts programs, to do things like bring authors into schools, create plays and take the plays to different locations. All of those things are things that we're working on right now. So
I love it. It would be very difficult, and if I'm going down the wrong path here, please stop me. But it'd be very difficult to think about, number one, what the original goal was for the American Griot Project, and back to where we are now politically, without getting into a discussion about that, because that's not why we're here. Sharia and Maria both, have you found that in writing this and putting this together, maybe some themes that used to be, center stage have now sort of come full circle? Would you say that that's fair?
Absolutely. The more things change, it seems the more they stay the same. And that is that's the tragedy. That's so sad that it seems we're on this hamster wheel and we just keep spinning and spinning. So for me, the only way forward is collectively. And to be okay, being uncomfortable, knowing that in that discomfort, we're going to open dialogue in safe spaces, and that's really key, that we're creating this safe forum to dialogue, and to dialogue about real issues, real things that are happening. The protagonist, the main character in this, and both, two, are in an interracial relationship. Mm-hmm. That's real. And that brings real discourses around race. around understanding who we are and how we've come here and what we truly, truly believe, biases and the difference between a prejudice and something that is filled with hate. That they're two different things. So, yes, without being political, we are just looking and exploring things that are about being human. Mm-hmm. And that's why I appreciate this project and all the people who've come together around it. We're learning around the table first, and we have a very diverse cast.
Maria, what parallels do you see with our sort of our modern day political playing field, if you will, and maybe some of the themes of this play as you look back on it?
Well, I definitely, it has become very evident, even the last 48 hours, that white supremacy has reared its ugly head and doesn't plan on going anywhere. And I think that everyone, whether you are a person of color or a white person, an immigrant, if you are a person that believes in humanity and believes in love, then there's no way that you could stand in cahoots with or complicit with white supremacy, especially the violence that has emerged from that. And we all have different tools that we can use to dismantle an evil system such as this. And for Reclaim Artists Collective, that is the arts. And so for me, it's poetry. For some, it's theater. For some, it's music. For some, it's in the courtroom. For some, it's in the streets. But our vision for Reclaim Artists Collective is we strive to create a world in which all people, regardless of race, religion, gender, identity, or class, can live together in the full poetry of existence, empowered to celebrate their own uniqueness and speak their truth. And I believe through the plays that we produce and create and collaborate with, that we are helping people to speak their truth.
Well, I think that's interesting because really that's what art is about. It's about an expression, and it's about helping deal with a very difficult world as an outlet for us. I mean, even in some small way, this for me is an outlet. So to your point, where some people use poetry, some people use theater, like this is my art, this is what I do, and this provides me an outlet to kind of understand and grasp like a lot bigger things than just, you know, Professor Paul Miller here in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And I really just respect that about this whole, not only just the collective, but this whole process that you've gone through, Maria, because it was just a labor of love initially, and then once you started finally wrapping up some of the interviews, and I mean, your piece that you did previously was just so moving, and even for someone who couldn't really even imagine what some of these individuals that you were talking about went through, it was just such a clear picture to me of what happened in our country, and something that is absolutely still needed to be spoken about. And again, we can definitely see some parallels between the past and, as Sharia said so eloquently, you know, it's just the same types of things just continuing over and over and over again. So I really thank you both for talking with us about the creative process that went into this, because I know that this is not something that's easy to do. One final question I want to ask Sharia, because this is something that you're writing and this is going to be the first time for this, how difficult is it to see it on stage the first time? Even if you're in like dress rehearsals, are you just super, you know, picky about things and wanting to make sure, because you have this vision for yourself? You know, how easy is it to see it that first time for you?
It's not easy at all. Even the table reads and exploring the pieces is hard. It's and I'm constantly asking myself, are they getting it? More so than what is it going to look like theatrically? Because for Sankofa and for me, theater is the vehicle. It is the means to the end. It's not the end. And but it is hard. But also, I have to be a student of the teaching that I'm up there preaching. And I have to listen. I have to be open. and I have to learn. So I keep focused on that. Janet and Maria, I don't know that I'm going to be there opening night in the theater. I'm going to probably be in the restroom, just
At least
couch
you're honest.
down, I can't do this. It's like for me having a baby. You have it in you, and you're nervous about giving birth because the first time you don't really know what it's like, but you hear all of these stories and you hear all these wives' tales and everybody's giving you advice. But when it's time to deliver and you just push, it just happens. And that baby that is placed in your arms, it's so beautiful. And you just forget all about the fears and everything because you've got this baby. So that's how this is for me. I'm like, you know what? No matter how hard it is, no matter how afraid and scared I am that it's not working, it's not flowing, and how protective I am of this, it's already a beautiful life. And I just can't wait to birth it so others can hold it and they'll coo and ah, because that's what you do when you give new life to something.
That's a fantastic analogy. I love it. Well, I did want to come back to Janet briefly. We will have you back, and we will discuss about the next thing we're going to chat about on a future episode when we have you back next term. But I really wanted to take the time to look forward to the winter term, the fall term, about something about a murder mystery dinner. Would you like to elaborate on that a little bit for us, Janet?
Sure. So, completely switching gears, in December, we will have a murder mystery dinner. It's an elfin murder mystery dinner called Mac Jingle All the Way, and the Oxymoron Improv Troupe is in charge of crafting the murder mystery. They're building it from scratch for us. And in the theater, we will turn the theater into a dinner theater, and people will be treated to a 4-course Italian meal. We only have 2 nights, and I think one of the nights might be sold out. The Thursday night for a special event for a group of people. So it'll be a lot of fun, and it'll also be limited seating, about 50 people. And it'll be, of course, interactive and everything. And the Oxymorons, if you don't know them, you should check them out because they're regularly performing down in New Cumberland at Boomerang. No, Comedy Zone, which is at Boomerang Restaurant.
Yeah.
But speaking of things getting sold out, Bridge the Gap, we're doing it for only 2 performances. And when we did Reclaiming My Time, we had 4 performances. They were sold out. We had to put in extra chairs. Mm-hmm. People could not get seated on the last performance. They thought they would just show up and be able to. And we did 2 days of school performances that were sold out as well. So we really believe Bridge the Gap will sell out very quickly. And we did Theater in the Round for Reclaiming My Time. We're doing immersion thrust staging for Bridge the Gap, where we will have bridges in the audience. And there are so many emotional, literal, and figurative bridges in this show relating so specifically to distance, like literally a bridge from one point to another, to deepen one's soul. And for that reason, we are fortunate with Bridge the Gap to have a post-show discussion facilitated by a friend and board member of Sankofa, John Trey Williams, who is trained with race relations as well as other topics. Because we, like Sharia said, we want to create crucial conversations and allow people to really have that time to talk about what they're thinking and feeling as a result of what the show has brought forth. So you don't want to wait to get your ticket. That's what I'm saying about Bridge the Gap.
Well, and we will certainly continue to promote this show on the Nightly News. But honestly, everyone, thank you so much for taking the time out. And Janet, thank you so much for always coming down.
Thanks for having me.
We are very looking forward to our 100th podcast here in just a couple of weeks.
Amazing.
So, yeah, we're having a big little celebration for that. So, but seriously, the Nightly News podcast wouldn't be what it is without you, Janet. Honestly, even though sometimes I have to rope you in a little bit because you tend to go beyond the time allotted, I think that's what gives our episodes extra character. But seriously, honestly, Janet, you don't have a bigger fan than me. What you do is so amazing. The different types of pieces that you do. Each semester, each term is something different and unique. And the fact that you are able to work with students that we don't have a theater program, you're basically mentoring them into often some of their first experiences in theater, and the quality that you put out there, it's really unbelievable. And the fine work that you do with our students is just absolutely should be commended. And, I'm one of your number one supporters, so.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. And Maria, I continue to be in awe of your talents. I never was a poet myself, but I respect the artistic component of being a poet, and it's amazing that our students have the opportunity to learn from you in class, but it's also amazing what you've done here in some of your pieces with the theater. So thank you so much for your hard work. And frankly, and I'm sure you already know this, but if it wasn't for you documenting these stories, they wouldn't exist.
Yeah, we just about 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks ago, lost one of our griots, Marion Dornell, who gave us the wonderful story about going to elementary school here in Harrisburg and winning a spelling bee and what drama that caused. And we would never have had that story without great women like her being willing to share.
It's awesome. And Sharia, thank you so much again for what you're doing and the amazing things that you do in addition to having a full-time job, the numerous number of things with not only Sankofa, but with some of the other local theater troupes, and certainly here at Central Penn College. So Sharia, thank you so very much.
Oh, thank you, and you're welcome. I'm excited about everything that goes on in this space here. I'm excited. Thank you, Janet, and thank you, Maria, for having me.
Thank you.
Well, I have to tell you, this is our final podcast before episode 100. We will have something next week with our Best Of show, so tune back in for that to check out a little bit more about the American Griot Project with Maria Chow. But honestly, thank you all so much for being here. We're going to grab our tickets for September 14th and 15th with Bridge the Gap in the Capital BlueCross Theatre. So again, we'll continue to share more information about that, but from the Nightly News, we wish you all the best of luck, and I will certainly be there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that's it for another episode of the Nightly News Podcast. This is so for Sharia Benn, the Executive Artistic Director of Sankofa African American Theater, for Janet Bixler, the Theater Director of the Capital BlueCross Theatre, and for poet and, of course, faculty member here at Central Penn College, Maria Chow. Thank you all so much for being here.
My pleasure.
All right, that's it for another episode. This is Professor Paul Miller, and we'll see you next time on the Nightly News Podcast.